So by improving your running economy, you can essentially improve your velocity at a given threshold. So I would start with one of the biggest mistakes I see people making is that they tend to lift, because it's running, it's endurance, they lift lighter loads for lots of repetitions. Strength training for running, if it's done specifically for running, will not make you bulkier and will not slow you down. It does the opposite, it makes you faster.
Thanks for joining me, Rose Harvey.
And me, Steph McCall.
For 5 Miles Easy.
The podcast where we go behind the scenes on the highs, lows and learnings of our running journeys.
And bring you conversations to inspire, motivate and get you one step closer to your running goals.
So let's lace up
for 5 Miles Easy. Welcome back to the show. On today's episode, we're going to be joined by running physio and strength and conditioning coach, Aidan O'Mahony, also known as the Irish Physio on Instagram. We're going to be finding out exactly why we need to strength train, not only to prevent injury, but also to get faster.
I can't wait to get into it. But first, Rose, how's your week been?
My week's been good. It's been very busy, actually. I've had a really hectic week, but all fun stuff. A lot on the pod, a lot of running, back to sessions.
Yeah.
And I've been quite pleased with myself because my session days have all been sunny, which at the moment I feel like is a massive, massive win.
Yeah, it really
and really compensates for the few drenchings I've had on my easy runs. But I've just been very grateful they've been on my easy runs and not on my sessions.
Yeah.
So that's been the win of the week, I'd say.
And even when it's cold outside, just having the sun out makes everything so much better.
So much
better.
better.
In a good mood.
I had a session in Battersea Park today, and it was so sunny I couldn't see. And I thought, you know what, I'm not complaining.
No,
but it was delightful.
Yeah.
So
and didn't you have a photo shoot this week as well?
I did have a photo shoot, and
did it rain?
It didn't rain, but it was really cold, and we were shooting, because this is the way photo shoots where you're shooting spring collection. And I can confirm it was not spring weather. So
I didn't even realise that.
Yeah, the short shorts, I'm not going to lie, having to run after 3 hours of standing around in short shorts was really challenging because I could not feel my legs at all.
Oh my gosh, I bet.
But hopefully the photos are good and I don't look completely blue and frozen.
I'm sure they're great.
How's your week been?
Yeah, I've had a really busy week as well. I was in Edinburgh on the weekend, which was lovely. Blue skies the whole weekend, which...
your session looked great. Such a nice location.
Yeah, that was so nice. And I heard it was raining here at the time. So I was like, to be in Scotland and have the weather feel better than down south, I was like, yes. But it was really cold. So I started wearing my running gloves for the first time this season.
Okay.
Yeah. And then this week, yeah, been pretty busy. Pod, work, had a haircut today.
I noticed.
Those people watching on YouTube, this is the best my hair's ever going to look because it's going to be tied up soon and sweaty again. So, and then, then made my way here. But I did have a very eventful journey here today.
What happened?
So I love everything about the podcast. And one thing in particular that I love a lot is my commute here. So especially on a sunny day like today, I always get a line bike through Richmond Park. Those who don't live in London or a city where they have line bikes, they're just electric bikes that you can hire on an app. Very useful to get around. And I get on this line bike. I am going into Richmond Park Gate and I feel that the pedal's a little bit wobbly. And I'm like, oh, it's fine, just keep going. And then I'm in the middle of Richmond Park and the pedal just fully fell off. But cars were going past and I've already moved on since the pedal's fallen off. And I was like, well, I can't just get this pedal and put it back on. Like, I don't have my tools with me. So I had to carry on, like, pushing there was
just
no
one-legged?
Yeah, like there was no sticky out bit on the pedal. So, I mean, I don't know what it's called. Sorry to the triathletes and cyclists out there. But there was just like, there was no sticky out bit is what I'm calling it. So I had to like use my heel to push that side down so the other side came up and I could push the pedal down. And it made it very hard. And Richmond Park is not flat. So thank God it was an electric bike. And then a car came past me and shouted out the window, "You're doing a very good job with one pedal and a wonky wheel." And I didn't even know the wheel was wonky, so that was probably about to fall off next. But
Oh
I
my
survived
God.
the
Well, you
journey.
made it. And you
I
know
made it.
what? I think that can count as half your gym session because all that single leg
really
work,
hurt.
you nailed it.
Rose, I can't wait for this episode. I need so many tips when it comes to strength training. Since the marathon, I'm really struggling to get myself back in the gym. So how do I do it?
Oh yeah, me too. I feel like the gym it's always my graveyard shift of the week. So it'll be so good to get some tips.
Yeah.
But at the moment, what does your strength plan look like?
So I've had some good advice over the years. I've had someone coaching me with strength training. So I've learned the right techniques for things. I've learned the exercises that help me. But at the moment, I've got no one specifically guiding me with it. I just kind of have some knowledge, and it's up to me. When am I going to go to the gym and make myself do this? So I really struggle to get in the gym. But at the moment, I'm like, I'll try to do twice a week, but it is a real like pat on the back when I get in once. So yeah, and I tend to actually stick to a very similar routine every time just because I know it and I feel a benefit, and I feel like I'm pushing myself in a way where it hurts a bit, but the next day I don't feel too bad, so I know I can still
Yeah, so you're not
train.
too sore for sessions.
But it would be good to find out from Aidan actually how hard should we be pushing ourselves in the gym. Do I need to maybe lift a bit heavier, push myself a bit more, try and progress the weights, and be doing maybe some different exercises, because I very much focus on kind of my glutes, my hips, my hamstrings, because that's the area that I've had most issues with, and I can kind of neglect some other bits just because I think they're fine. I've never been injured there, and so it's okay. But actually, I probably should be doing those.
I
as
guess
well.
for prevention.
Yeah.
And also, as we say, like to get faster and better rather than just injury prevention. But what are some of the exercises you do?
So my absolute favourites are anything single leg, and I feel like they're really beneficial because you run on one leg. You've only ever got one leg on the ground, so you want to have stability on one leg at a time, and not kind of be collapsing at the hip when you land. So single leg deadlifts, split squats, just like any sort of glute bridge on a single leg, step ups onto a box, that sort of thing are kind of my go-tos.
And heavy body weight?
I don't do body weight, but I'll usually lift like a kettlebell or dumbbells rather than I have in the past lifted heavy where I've been on the bar, but I'm kind of out of the routine of doing that. So that's what I need to be like. Actually, I probably need to be lifting heavier where I've got a barbell, putting weights on that and testing myself a bit more.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you do high reps?
Yeah,
Doing
I'm
low
probably
weight, yeah.
more of a
High rep, low
girl.
weight.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of opposite actually. But I have to say, I've really fluctuated over the years, and I've had I've gone down a lot of different avenues with the gym, and sometimes I've gone down like the high rep, low weight avenue. But at the moment, I'm definitely on more the high weight, the heavy weight, low rep avenue. Squats, split squats. I'm similar to you. I tend to focus on like single leg stuff because I feel like that is more like running.
Yes.
But heavy weights, maximum of 10 reps, 3 sets. Glutes, the big focus. Hips, the big focus.
Yeah.
Hamstrings
powerhouse.
and calves. Calf raises are my real go-to because similarly to you focusing on injury areas, that's where I've had issues in the past. So I do a lot of heavy calf raises.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And try to progress that.
And at the moment, how many times a week are you doing? So you're obviously back into training since Chicago. Have you got a focus on kind of going a few times a week to the gym, or how does that look at the moment for you?
So I do 2 main sessions at the gym, and that's when I'll lift heavy weights. And then I do actually do at least 1 or 2 shorter, more, I call them more S&C sessions, and it's lighter weights, but it's more like physio exercises. So I do a lot of foot strength.
Okay.
Those single leg squats on the bossy ball. I can't remember the name of them now, but you go like right down on one leg.
That's really going to annoy me.
Oh, that's really...
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's
They're
like
really hard, but it kind of mobilises your ankle area and works on your foot strength as well. Pistol squats.
Pistol, yeah.
That's it.
I'm so glad you got that.
Obviously, you can tell my gym knowledge is great. Those exercises I do. So I do a lot of that, and I'll do that at least 2 other times outside my heavy lifting.
That's so impressive. I mean,
it is my job. I'm lucky that
I
I've got the time.
I was about to ask though, how has your strength routine changed since you've become a full-time athlete versus when you...
Oh, I used to do bugger all.
Yeah.
I mean, if I got in the gym once a week when I was working full-time, that was really good. But then I used to train in the evenings, and I'd finish my session at 8:30, and I was like, well, I could go to the gym, but then I'm home at 9:30, then I'm not sleeping till midnight.
Yeah.
And you're just
so
knackered.
hard to fit it all in. Well, it is something I struggle with. I mean, I do have flexibility with work, but I prioritize my runs. And sometimes I'm like, okay, well, I could skip this run and actually go and do a gym session. I could even jog to the gym and go and do this gym session. But it gets to the evening when I plan to do it, and I'm like, it's just so much easier to go out for a run.
Yeah.
Because it's done quicker, it's more enjoyable. But I really need to flip that and be like, actually, you know what? Long term, it could be more beneficial me going to do the gym session.
Yeah, because it's going to keep you running for longer, keep you injury free. Okay, so this is another question for Aidan. How do we structure it, and how do we get ourselves to the gym consistently?
Yeah.
Right, I think it's time to welcome Aidan to the show.
Aidan is a specialist running physiotherapist and strength and conditioning coach. He helps runners not just prevent getting injured, but also gets them stronger and faster as well. Previously, Aidan played professional football in Ireland, but his career curtailed with 3 ACL ruptures. His own injury journey ignited passion for injury rehab and prevention. Aidan now has his own practice in Putney, London, and has just launched his own strength and conditioning online program for runners too.
Aidan, thanks so much for joining us for 5 Miles Easy today. We are so excited to get all our questions answered in relation to physio, strength and conditioning. But before we dive into all of that, our first question is, what is your why when it comes to running?
Great question. My why, I did think about this, is as a physio, I get to work with runners every day. And over the past number of years, I've seen runners achieve amazing things, push the boundaries to what we think we can achieve. And that's how I then got into running, from treating runners. And as you run, you tend to live longer. So for the health benefits is one of the big reasons. And runners tend to stop running because they get injured. So I play a key role in helping people live longer.
That's awesome. Wow, what a rewarding job. That is very cool.
And you haven't always run, as you said, and you just said that helping people with their running injuries kind of got you into running more. Prior to that, you were a professional footballer for a bit in Ireland, is that right?
Yeah, correct. A long time ago now.
So how did that transition look from you having that lifestyle and then going into being a physio, treating running injuries, and then realising perhaps that you wanted to get into running too? What did that look like?
So a long story short, I started off growing up playing a lot of football and signed with a professional club in Ireland, and then had the unfortunate incident of having ACL rupture, and came back after 5 months, re-ruptured it again, and then got released. So having seen a lot of physio whilst I was rehabbing my own injury, I was like, okay, maybe I could do this. And that's how I then got into physiotherapy. And following on from that, I did rowing at quite a competitive level. So that's where I found a love for the endurance sport, those long, easy miles. And the natural progression from rowing tends to be triathlon or running. And then that's how I kind of fell into that, as well as treating a lot of them during that time. So that's how I find myself here.
Nice. That's awesome. So we've mentioned, obviously you go to a physio for injury prevention, strength and conditioning, also great for injury prevention. But as runners, can you just tell us, start from the basics, why should we strength train?
So I think the unique selling point for runners is they love performance. You look at these fast shoes, gadgets, it's like, how can I improve my performance? So one of the big unique selling points is that you can improve your running economy. So when we look at what limits performance, we have kind of 3 indicators. So we have your VO2 max, your percentage of your VO2 max that you can access, and your running economy. So as strength training, we know that you can improve your running economy by up to 8%. So think of taking up to 8% off a particular time, like your marathon time or 10K or whatever it might be. So we have the performance side of things, but also the improvement of like things like bone density, tendon health, muscle health. And when it comes to the research in running related injuries, we don't have a huge amount. So we just have to be mindful and say it's likely going to reduce a lot of overuse injuries.
And what is running economy?
So it's the amount of energy that you use at a submaximal effort. So if you look at like your VO2 max amount of oxygen that we can consume within a minute, it's the amount of energy that we can use at a particular pace. So by improving your running economy, you can essentially improve your velocity at a given threshold. So if you're looking at running a particular pace throughout a marathon, if you can improve that velocity by 5 to 8%, then that's going to lead to significant improvements in obviously your performance.
So how does being stronger then link into that?
Great question. So in terms of muscle tendon stiffness, so when we're running, it's like a series of hops. So our body and our lower limbs predominantly act as springs. It stores and releases energy. So the stronger the tendon, the stiffer the tendon, if you think of like a spring, it stores and releases energy. If you've got a really stiff spring, you drop it, it's going to bounce higher. So we can return better energy. And as a result, if you have a stronger maximal strength, there's a correlation with you having better reactive strength, meaning when we hit the ground, we can produce force, we improve all of these like neuromuscular components. And by having a higher power output, we've got essentially a bigger energy tank. So that then can lead to you using less energy if you've got like these really stiff tendons.
So we can literally cover more ground with less energy if we're stronger and therefore go faster.
Pretty much, yeah.
Nice.
Sold.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sold.
Okay, so we know we should strength train. What should we be doing as runners? Like how many times should we be going to the gym? What exercises should we be doing? Should we be doing heavy weights, light weights? Talk us through it.
I would start with one of the biggest mistakes I see people making is that they tend to lift, because it's running, it's endurance, they lift lighter loads for lots of repetitions. The problem with that is the limiting factor becomes metabolic. So when you go beyond like 15 repetitions, it's not neuromuscular, and that's what we're trying to do when we strength train. So we see in terms of like improvements in performance and just strength and bone health in general, it's lifting heavier load for fewer repetitions. Now, there's lots of ways that you can do that depending on what you've got access to, what your schedule looks like. So as an elite athlete, you're going to have more time to recover between. So you might strength train and run on the same day. But a lot of people, the limiting factor will be time constraints if they've got a family, a busy life. So you can go to the gym, you can do it at home 20 minutes a day, pick 2 or 3 exercises. So there's lots of different ways to doing it. But when you look at the general research, 2 sessions a week is sufficient enough. Okay. So if you partake in a 20-week strength program and you do it twice a week, you can improve your maximum strength by up to 26%, which is huge. Mm-hmm. And as a result, then you get all the other benefits from it. But then going into in-season, you can maintain those benefits by 1 session a week. So if you look at a 40-week total season, 20 weeks to really build that maximum strength, and then when it goes into race season, you've got 1 session per week where you can reduce the heavy lift and just improve. I would refer to it as sharpening the knife as you come into race.
Okay, so that makes sense. So we spoke to Katie Snowden, where she spoke about the summer season is the big racing season for track athletes, and then the winter is when they're doing all the strengthening. So that's when they would do like the 2 sessions a week, and then as you get into the summer, 1 session. And I guess for marathon runners, would it be that at the beginning of the block you're building your strength, and then maybe towards the last few weeks you might want to reduce that? Is that the right understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. So you periodize your strength training as much as you would your running. You might have a particular focus on a block where you're looking to build your mileage, and then you'll add in a bit of intensity or whatever it might be. And strength training is very similar. It's very individual depending on what your goal is. But yes, you would periodize it. So as your running volume is building, you don't need to have fresh legs for those really tough sessions. Mm-hmm. You would want to put more priority to building maximum strength. And that would differ from someone who's experienced to someone who's not. For example, if you're experienced with strength training, I'm happy giving you a high percentage of like your, let's say, 10 rep max. Whereas if someone is new to strength training, you're not going to give them those heavy weights early on. And that often is the limiting factor. Is like, well, what weight should I be lifting?
Yeah.
And I would often work to like 2 reps in reserve, for example, between 6 to 12 reps, whatever rep range you decide, is have 2 reps in reserve, and that can give you an indication that's the right amount of load. Because a lot of people will lift and they've got about 10 reps in reserve. That's true. That's not going to give you the benefits. So to answer your question, yes, you would prioritize maximum strength early on, and then you can look at things like reactive strength by doing plyometrics, which won't carry the DOMs, because the DOMs will come from those eccentric forces, lengthening tissues.
Okay.
What should we be aiming for? Like ideally, as maybe as a percentage of body weight, for something like a squat, like what should we be aiming for?
Great question. So I would look at, in terms of the squat, so for example, split squat, I'd be looking for someone to get up to 50% of their body weight. For a back squat, I'd be looking at someone to try and achieve their body weight on the bar, including the bar. So for example, I'm 90 kilos, I'm a bit heavier, but let's say 90 kilos, I want to build up towards that. Yeah. And the key thing then is that it's the progressive loading. That's a mistake a lot of people make, is they'll pick an exercise, they'll do it for a number of weeks, which is great, but they don't add weight to the exercise. Yeah. So that's where the progressive loading is what creates that adaptation. It's that overload. Same thing with your running. As you progress those miles, that's your body starts to adapt. Your body gets very used to doing the same thing over and over, so you have to keep it kind of guessing. But so that's with the back squat. When you look at arguably the most important muscle group when it comes to running is your calf complex. Your soleus muscle and your gastrocnemius is that's what we refer to as your calf complex, the powerhouse muscle. So we look for runners to be able to achieve up to 50% of their body weight on a single leg calf raise. So if you think of, if I ask both of you guys, do you do the single leg calf raise as an exercise?
Yeah, but not holding 50% of my body weight.
What would it be roughly?
Probably like a quarter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about yourself,
I
Rose?
do 50%. But my calves have always been my weak bit. So
yeah.
It's like the one exercise I've always really focused on. And I've like had Achilles problems and everything. So it's the one thing I've always had to really focus on.
Yeah. The stronger your muscle, the stronger the bone. So if you look at one of the most common running related injuries, particularly in the elite level, it's obviously bone stress injuries, and that can lead to a long period on the sidelines. Yeah. So when we look at people who have had things like tibial stress fractures, is we often see up to about 50% reduction in calf capacity after. So the biggest predictor for a running related injury is a history of that injury. It sounds negative initially, and I always put a positive twist. If you've had an injury, chance of you getting it again are much higher. But the physio's job and the S&C job is to try and reduce that risk altogether, which is exactly as you described. When you're looking at planning a strength program for a runner, you have to look at their previous injuries. Yeah. And exactly as you mentioned, if you've Achilles and previous, tibial issues, then calf raise 50%, great.
Yeah, well, that's it, isn't it? I think you make it such a good point that it's the same for me, whereas I've had hamstring issues in the past. So a lot of the exercise I focus on will be around like hamstring, glutes, rather than I might end up neglecting the calves, because I think to me it's not as important, but it's a good reminder, as you said, you can't neglect anything. You need to keep on top of it all, but there might just be some specific areas that need a bit more focus.
Absolutely. And when it comes to structuring a program, it's keep it simple. Have a couple of warm-up exercises, have maybe 3 to 4 main lifts within a session. You don't have to be doing 10 or 12 different exercises. When we look at the amount of sets per week that can lead to improvements in running economy, it's actually a lot less than what most people would think. So doing 3 or 4 main lifts within a session, and you can maybe split that within the second session, maybe a bit of push and pull type stuff, and then having a couple of exercises that are looking at more stretch shortening cycle, which is like, for example, your Achilles, like your plyometrics, store and release energy. So if you break it, warm up, main lifts, bit of trunk, bit of plyometric type stuff. And I did a session this morning, it took me 50 minutes.
Now time to thank the sponsor of this episode, EcoSwash.
Now, Steph, I don't know about you, but the one thing I don't like about marathon training is the washing. So much washing. 2 runs a day, sometimes a gym session in there too. That is a lot of sports kit, a lot of laundry detergent, and with those little plastic pods, a lot of plastic too, which can't be great for the environment.
You need to try EcoSwash. They've created revolutionary plant-based laundry sheets specifically designed to clean activewear.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so good.
It's also 100% animal cruelty free, and it's plastic free, and it smells so fresh.
I need this in my life. Where can I buy it?
That's the other great thing about EcoSwash. You don't have to worry about the hassle of running to the shops because it arrives straight through your letterbox.
Okay, sign me up.
Okay, head to ecoswash.co.uk and buy your box today.
So we've got sort of 6 to 10 reps, heavyweight. How many sets would you do?
Great question. So I would,
it
again,
look
it's
like?
an added stimulus. So it's an added stress to what you're already doing. So we have to factor that in terms of recovery. So I would start off with, as an example, 3 lots of 10 reps, working to 2 reps in reserve. But as you progress forward, you look at, for example, like Jake Whiteman, you know, he's very well at documenting his strength and conditioning, and he's very good at progressively loading, increasing the amount of sets to maybe even 4 to 5. It depends on the individual, but you would be looking to try and get up to, say, 4 sets of 4 to 6 repetitions at that higher weight, that higher percentage of your 1 repetition max.
How does that look like in terms of the progression? So you can increase the number of sets, you can also increase the weight, but do you always do it at the same time? And how do you know how often to try and push it a bit more?
Yeah, great question, because a lot of people will tend to change too many variables at one time. Same thing when it comes to running. You know, they'll change their volume, increase their volume, their frequency, their intensity. So when it comes to it, I will have a couple of weeks where I'll focus on staying at the same rep range and increasing the load. And then as the sets change, when I add a set, I'll tend to reduce the amount of reps down to, let's say, 6 to 8 repetitions. And then naturally the weight will go up because you're working to 2 reps in reserve at 6 reps versus 10 reps. But it's making small changes is what's key, because your body knows what it's used to. And it's that increase in load or big changes. Same thing when it comes to running. If you're not used to doing a lot of intensity, you add intensity, chances are you're going to pick something up. And same thing with strength training. Don't change too many variables, and when you do, make it a small change.
Yeah, really gradual. And what we mentioned the calves already, but what are some really key exercises? Say if someone's going to the gym and they've got time for, you know, to do four different exercises, what would you say like the really key ones for running are?
So I would tend to look at one compound lift where you've got like a big exercise such as back squat, RDL, some sort of hip hinging movement, and then I'll have a couple of accessory like single leg. Split squat is a great one in terms of bang for your buck. Split squat, you're getting good glute, hip abduction strength, quad strength, even a bit of proximal hamstring strength. And then I will always have a calf raise. If you don't like calf raises, learn to love calf raises because it is essential. And then I'll tend to add in an upper body exercise. So, for example, half kneeling, overhead press, or a pulling type exercise. So have one big compound lift, such as your deadlift, back squat, RDL, have a couple of accessory movements. I really like using machine weights, particularly if you've had an injury, meaning, for example, if you've had a knee injury or hamstring injury, looking at leg extension, leg curl, because you can't really cheat on those. When you do something like a split squat, you can use a bit more hip strength versus quad strength. When you're in a machine, like a leg extension, you can't cheat. It's just your quads. So it's depends on the individual, but that's how I tend to split it up. And I'd finish off then with some plyometrics and a bit of core.
Yeah, when you say plyometrics, can you just give us some examples?
Okay, so if you look at skipping, it's an example of a plyometric exercise. It's short contact time. That's what makes it plyometric.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at skipping, you're up and down, it's short contact. What we would then do for a runner is we would start off with a low intensity, say 3 to 4 out of 10 effort, because we don't want to risk flaring up like Achilles or other areas. And then gradually, as they're progressing, I'll increase that intensity, meaning they hit the ground, they produce more force. So if you think of like a pogo stick, pogo hops is the classic one. So if you think of a pogo stick, it just goes up and down, it doesn't bend in the middle. So when you're jumping up and down, you're trying not to bend the knees, and you're trying to use your Achilles and your calf to store and release that energy. Other things like explosive exercises such as box jumps or depth jumps, drop jumps, Loads of these on my Instagram profile if you want to have a look at it.
Awesome. Would you ever do anything in like not in another direction? You know, running's like just forward moving and we don't do anything side to side. Would you suggest?
Yeah, I think it's a really nice segue into looking at bone related issues. So if you look at when we're looking at bone related issues and we're trying to prevent them, it's best to do it at an early age before puberty, because when we hit puberty, that's where bones are really mechanosensitive. So if you look at athletes who have been involved in multi-directional sports such as basketball, hockey, football, they'll tend to have stronger skeletons. Like running, not all runners have strong skeletons. So looking at multi-directional sports is very important, particularly at a younger age, because when you're running, your bone cells get bored of running in straight lines. So after like 100 cycles of loading, your bone cells essentially go deaf. So they switch off. And then often people tend to go into the gym and strength train straight after, which is not going to promote bone adaptation. So I would always make sure there's at least 4 or 5 hours between strength sessions if you can, because the bone cells will switch back on after 4 hours, and then you can look at promoting new bone. So bone is constant cycle of new bone clearing out old bone, and it's always happening. And when we get bone stress injuries, it's as a result of the amount of healing is exceeded by the amount of loading. And that will bring us into another thing in terms of like intensity being important. But yes, multi-directional sports. I've put up this silly video of me tossing a balloon on one side here and I'm trying to change direction. Yeah. So even to elite runners, I would say, look, during your off season, play tennis, play a racket sport. Yes, you've got the risk of maybe twisting an ankle or something like that. But in terms of looking at what we call the role of adaptive bone formation, there's a lady called Julie Greaves. She does a lot of research in this, and it's much more beneficial at loading the bone multi-directional, short bouts of high intensity multi-directional loading.
Wow, that's so interesting. Bone strength, obviously important for everyone, but especially as kind of over 40s, over 50s, and loads of people run older than that as well. So how important is strength training for runners over 40, and should they be doing anything different?
Arguably, it's even more important, because obviously with sarcopenia, the loss of bone strength and quality muscle strength. So as we get older, naturally our muscles will tend to get a little bit weaker. We'll lose a bit of muscle mass. And I often use strength training. It can almost stop that and reverse that. So see it as a positive. So for people, the injuries will change from younger athletes to older athletes. So from a master's perspective, you'll tend to see more soft tissue like calf area, Achilles tendon, whereas with a younger athlete, it's more kind of bony, articular surface. So when we're getting older, as we lose that quality of the tissue, we want to try and make sure that we don't do that by strength training. And to answer the question in terms of does it change, exercises are pretty similar. But you might change the intensity depending on their experience. Most people, as they get older, they get a bit afraid of strength training because they don't want to cause injury. Whereas obviously that's counterproductive. It
actually prevents it.
Massively.
Yeah, I actually read it's not even from 40. It's like from 30 you lose 1% of muscle mass a year. Is that right?
I'm not sure exactly is the numbers, but yes, once you get to 30, but then as we go forward in terms of decades, it gets even, the numbers just
okay,
go
so
higher.
We need to get on it right now.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And then in terms of, we discussed, 2 days a week is a good guideline. What days of the week should we be doing it in terms of our training week? So should we be going in the gym on the days we're doing harder sessions and keeping those hard days hard? Or is it okay to also strength train on a recovery day when...
Yeah, again, it would depend on the individual, but if we look at the different levels of experience, if you've got an elite athlete like yourselves where you have the opportunity where you can recover, you will tend to heavy stack your days, whereas I want to keep a hard day hard. So my easy day is really easy. But then the other side of that is if the goal is to try and improve power output and you've done a hard session, you're then going into the gym carrying fatigue. Naturally, you're going to have a reduction in your ability to produce force, so you might not get the most out of it. It depends on how well you've recovered between sessions and your experience, but that would be the one thing I would say. If you're doing it on the same day, it's what we refer to as the interference effect. It tends to be more effective to strength train first and then do your session. Now, a lot of
Oh,
people will
really?
argue.
Yeah.
A lot of people will argue that point, and there is arguments for both sides. But that's, if you look at the research, the strength training tends to have less effect on your VO2, so the ability for you to use oxygen at a given pace, etc. Whereas if you then do a really tough run, that will have more of an effect on your ability to produce force.
Okay,
That's
so
really
ideally do strength, for example, in the morning, and then train in the evening. But then if you have to train in the morning, just make sure you've got a gap before going to the gym, and 5 to 6 hours. I guess
4
get some good
hours,
fuel
4
in.
hours plus is, but the longer you leave it, the better, essentially.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I mean, hopefully from this conversation, everyone will be convinced that they need to do the strength training. But let's talk about some barriers to getting to the gym. So lots of people think, and especially, in endurance running, this is a really common thing. Lots of people think if you go and lift heavy weights, especially, you're going to get bulky, which for endurance running might not be a good thing. What would you say to that?
So there was a great piece of research done by a guy called Chris Beattie in Ireland. He's based in University of Limerick, and he works with a lot of competitive runners. And they took runners, they did 2 different groups, one that strength trained and one that didn't. And they didn't change their running training. And after 40 weeks, the body composition, there was very little difference. So in terms of putting on muscle mass, it tends to be more higher volume, more repetitions, more exercises per muscle group, calorie surplus. So there's lots of different things that will contribute to trying to increase muscle mass. When it comes to strength training, we're looking at those higher loads, fewer reps. That's more looking at neuromuscular changes rather than creating muscle mass. So strength training for running, if it's done specifically for running, will not make you bulkier and will not slow you down. It does the opposite. It makes you faster.
So it makes your muscles stronger, but not bigger. So
Yes. Yeah,
kind
absolutely.
Of right, in a basic form.
We're trying to create neuromuscular adaptations for the brain to be able to kind of like send more, kind of recruit more muscle fibers, more power output for a given task. Whereas when you're looking at improving, muscle size, it tends to be less kind of drive, less force. So that's one thing about strength training, is when you're doing it, do it with intent. And the difference between an elite athlete versus a recreational is often the intensity that they do the strength training session at. So if you look at, Rose and Steph, like yourselves in the gym, I'd like to think that you're both, when you're working hard, you're working hard. Whereas a recreational runner might go in, not all of them, some of them are really good, they might go in and they might not be performing the exercise at the same intensity. Okay. So it's like track athletes, you go into the track, often they're just lying around because they've lots of rest periods. And then when they're working hard, they're working hard. The same thing in the gym is allow yourself that 90 seconds to 2 minutes recovery between sets.
Okay, that's also a really good point. Yeah, I was going to ask about recovery and how, so between each, so if you've got like 10 reps, you do that and then you take 90 seconds before the next set. What about in between exercises? Like how much rest would you have?
So a lot of times people will go from one leg to the other. If you're really working at that high level, you'll want to have up to, let's say, a minute before even you go on to the opposite leg. Between sets, then I would tend to give up to about 2 minutes, but definitely minimum 60 seconds, because you're carrying a little bit of fatigue from that exercise before you go into the next one.
Okay. And another barrier to getting into the gym is maybe the after effect of lifting weights, which is you feel sore, you've got DOMS. Do you have any tips in terms of how to recover better from lifting and maybe reduce the soreness?
Yeah, so DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, mainly as a result of heavy eccentric forces. So if you've ever run downhill, you'll know how bad the quads are the next day. Mm-hmm. So when we look at the research around it, between cold compression, we've got those, what are they called? Those kind of sleeves that you put on your leg, compression, just general compression. So you've got cold immersion, compression, massage. There's not a huge amount of research out there to say that it's going to accelerate the healing. What's more important, which is, I guess, coming into, maybe we can segue into reducing risk of injury, is getting your sleep, getting sufficient fuel in order for your body to adapt. So the training is the stimulus, and then what we do in terms of recovery is going to allow our body to adapt. Like, we only benefit from the training that we recover from. So look at the low hanging fruit. If you're an adult, 7 to 9 hours sleep per night, getting I'm not a nutritionist, but I think the rough numbers are around 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. So making sure that you're getting sufficient protein and sufficient fueling into your body to recover. If you do that, that's much more likely going to reduce the DOMs. And getting used to those forces as well, which is why you should start it before you come into these main races. So getting your body used to these eccentric forces under heavy load is going to help you a lot when it comes to you coming into your race season, because your body's used to it. So you don't tend to carry the same level of soreness into those sessions. Problem most people have is when they sign up for marathon, they then say, okay, I need a strength plan as well.
Yeah, I like that though. Just keep it simple. It's just the same with training as it is with strength training. So I mean, when I say training, I mean running training. That sleep and fuel is the best way to recover and adapt and get better. So it's nice just to keep it simple and know that that's what works.
It's so undervalued as well. When we look at the rates of injury, a lot of research is done on bone stress injuries in military personnel, because that's where obviously they put a lot of money. And we see those people who have sleep deprivation for a period of weeks, they'll tend to have a significantly higher incidence of bone stress injury. So sleep is a significant factor. Like vitamin D levels as well when it comes to bone and tendon stuff is really important, particularly here in the UK. So often when someone has a bone stress injury and they see a sports doc, they'll give them a high dose of vitamin D for a period of time. So these things are quite important and so undervalued. And it is, we tend to overcomplicate things. Keep it simple. Same in the physio world, is keeping things simple with rehab so that people can actually adhere to it and achieve it and then get the benefits from it.
Yeah, I guess the vitamin D is especially crucial as we're going into winter. Don't get a lot of sun in the UK. So
Unfortunately
not.
And Ireland is even worse, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, no, that's a good tip. So if we are sore from the gym, should we still run? So if we've got a session the next day and we've got really bad DOMs, should we do it?
Great question. So it will affect, there's a guy called Rich Willie based out in, it's called Montana Running Lab, amazing researcher. And he's done some research on, I believe he has, on biomechanics post muscle soreness. And it will affect your like foot strike and your stride length, etc. So there is things to consider. If you've got a really tough session, then it can take up to about 72 hours to really feel like you've properly recovered from it. So again, it depends on the individual and what you're used to doing. So again, when we look at things like injury and risk factors, it's always looking back at what you've done previously. What has your body tolerated? So if you've had a significant injury, you look back and you say, okay, maybe I was really stressed at that time. I was changing jobs, I was moving house, or I added way too much speed, too much hills. Same thing when it comes to strength training. Try not to change too much within your running. So yeah, I would just make sure if you do have a really tough session, try and give yourself a bit of recovery time.
I mean, I knew it before, and this conversation's highlighted more how important strength training is. But for me personally, it's not the most exciting part of my training. I obviously run because running's the bit that I enjoy doing. And then I know strength training is important for me to get better at running. So I want to be able to do that. But can you give me some tips to how to stick to a program and get myself in the gym and just not let it go?
You're absolutely right. Even I have the issue when I give people rehab plans, is one of the big issues is the adherence and do they actually do it? Not often the case. But if you look at when you're going off a run during the winter, it's tough doing it alone. I know, Rose, you've been stuck in the rain a lot around Battersea over the last few weeks and getting stuck in a lot of rain. But when you're with people, it makes it easier. Yeah. And it adds a bit more fun element to it, because lots of times when you're doing all of these miles and all these sessions, it's demanding on the body. Having other people around you is really useful at encouraging each other. So if you're doing a track session, you've got people pushing you. I remember listening to you, Rose, and you're saying you don't want to let someone down on a particular rep. If you're in the gym and you're working with other people, it's the same thing. You've agreed to turn up at a certain time. If you don't, you're going to let them down. So I think having a group of people to go to the gym with, even if it's just one training partner, I think that makes a big difference. And also having structure, so knowing what you're doing and working with someone that knows that area. If you've got structure, it takes away that kind of guessing, what should I be doing today? And often we just tend to go in, I'll do this exercise because this is free. So I think having structure, do it with people, they're two key things I think that will help people to partake in strength training.
Okay.
I think that's a great point because I know from my experience, I mean, now I feel quite confident in the gym because I've had people show me what to do. And I've had a couple of years of going to the gym. But I remember when I first started lifting heavy weights, I felt really unconfident in what I was doing. And actually just having someone there, whether that's a PT, if you can access that, or just a friend who knows what they're doing, is so valuable. And it just stops you, because I always used to go in and think, oh, I don't know what I'm doing with this. I don't want to hurt myself, so I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really, really good takeaway.
Yeah, and I think that brings nicely onto technique when you're strength training, is that often people won't do it because they fear that they're going to get injured.
Yeah.
I would say just know that the body's really resilient, really adaptable. When we look at technique, there's not a massive amount of research to say, oh, when you squat and you hinge slightly forward, you're going to increase your risk of having a back injury. What's more important is the amount of load that you're lifting, meaning you want a gradual progression. So if you do a squat and you have light weight and then you gradually add that weight, your body's going to adapt to the particular movement. We've all got different anatomies, different hip sizes, different shapes, female, male, different leg lengths. So no one particular way is perfect. And just have that in the background, knowing that, okay, as long as I feel comfortable lifting this load and I feel comfortable doing it, then I can start to progress beyond the current weight that you're lifting.
Okay, really useful. And then where can people find out more? So if they are looking for what's a guidance with technique, I know that you post a lot of stuff on your socials. So where can they head to find out a bit more about what
I think
you're posting?
you've got, it's looking at good resources. So YouTube is got everything, all right? It's a massive search engine, but it's trying to pick the good ones from the bad ones, because lots of things around strength training is the fear, oh, you're going to cause injuries, etc. So I think making sure you have good resources, people who are referencing research within their subtitles or whatever it might be. So just making sure you've got good resources, whether it's a physio, S&C coach. If you look at some of the S&C coaches out there, like Rich Blagrove is an amazing guy. You might have heard of Rich, I think he'll be
listening to this.
Yeah, Mary's. So Rich, a lot of this stuff is coming from your research, so I appreciate it. So if you look at things like Rich Blagrove, he's an amazing researcher within this field, and he's got, I believe he's got an amazing book as well, loads of different exercises. On my YouTube, I've got an exercise library. It's adding it every week. So just finding good resources is probably the best way, and trustworthy resources.
That's awesome. Okay, so head to your YouTube channel.
Head to my YouTube channel, yeah.
And you've got new strength program as well?
New strength program, yeah. The Run Strong Blueprint. That's another, so if it's a 6-week plan, and if anyone wants sort of like an introduction, I'm happy to give them like a couple of weeks where they can just try it out and see how they find it.
How do they access that then? Through
just message me on Instagram, the Irish Physio, and I'm happy to give out, as I said, a bit of a trial period for those guys that have come through from this podcast.
They have to reference 5 miles easy.
They have to follow 5 miles.
Great. Okay, so our final question that we ask all our guests is, what is your high five me moment?
I thought about this and it came to me so easy, and it's probably not what you think it will be. It was reaching out and asking for help when I needed it. So previously, having like had all these injuries, struggling mentally and not living like near family, and I was going through a pretty rough period, but then I just reached out, asked for help. At that time, I thought I was a bit ashamed of it. Now I'm proud of it. So now I look back and I'm like, my life now, I work with runners, I travel a lot, and my life is incredible. I love it, and it wouldn't be if I didn't ask for help at that time. So there you go.
What an amazing message for everyone.
I love that. That was awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And I have a gym session later, so thank you for motivating me to go to the gym. And now I know what I'm going to be doing. So that is great.
Yeah, very motivational. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, guys. Loved it.
Thanks for joining us, 5 Miles Easy. And if you're enjoying the show, please remember to leave us a good review on Spotify and Apple.
And if you're enjoying watching us on YouTube, please do subscribe.